Daniel Harris joins us on the line this morning. Good morning to you, Daniel.
Hi.
So he says there that Mick McCarthy's at an age now. I just wanted to start with you on this one. Is there some sort of theory that you need to be a wise old man to be perfect for international management?
I don't think it's so much you need to be a wise old man. It's more to do, I think, with the downside of international management and the reason that we don't see any top managers at all, more or less, in international football now is because the younger guys want the week-by-week thrust of competition and they want the elite level competition, and no one can now pretend that that is the European Championships or the World Cup. It's quite obviously the Champions League. So I think it's more that when a manager gets a bit older, they're happier with the slower rhythm of international football. I think also in international football, you don't get the opportunity to do very much coaching. You get your players together, you tell them how you want them to play, but you're not going to really improve players in the time that you have with them. You're just working on shape and picking the team and that kind of thing. So the younger guys also tend to have bigger ideas about imposing how they see football on players and developing players. And older people don't really have time for that. They just got to get on with it. And they want a slightly slower rhythm of life, perhaps. So I think that's more the situation with why he was saying Mick McCarthy might be suitable to take the Ireland job now.
I did want to get your take briefly on the link with Jurgen Klinsmann. There has been some suggestion in the Irish media this morning that the FAI have spoken to him. Would you like Jurgen Klinsmann managing your team right now?
Not particularly, but I guess that you've got to look at it from a perspective of who that team is. Ireland aren't my team. If Ireland were my team, I could definitely see a big upside to Jurgen Klinsmann, just as I could see the same downside. Not the same downside, but a downside. The upside to Jurgen Klinsmann is what you get with him is you get charisma, you get a name, you get someone that players are going to want to play for and want to be coached by. The problem with Jurgen Klinsmann is, I guess, part to do with the problem with Irish football is they don't really have any good players. And so if you're looking to think, well, if you look at the Ireland squad and think how to get the most out of them, it's more obviously easy to get the way out of them, to get something out of them by setting them up defensively and quite tactics heavy, if you like. So, like, if the other option is Carlos Queiroz, and he's sort of the opposite of Jurgen Klinsmann in that way, he's got no charisma whatsoever, but he does know how to set up a team to defend, which we saw with Manchester United, and we actually saw with Iran in the World Cup, who not only defended properly, but were actually enjoyable to watch as well, because they did it with such ludicrous intensity. So I think that Irish football needs some rejuvenation partly after what's gone on towards the end of O'Neill and Keane, but also just because of that lack of talent. And Klinsmann would be the person to deliver that. But then you think back to when he was at Bayern and Philipp Lahm writing that when he was the manager, the players needed to get together to discuss tactics because Jurgen Klinsmann didn't give them any. And realistically, this Ireland team are not going to get anywhere without some fairly serious thoughts about how to maximise what they've got and how to minimise what the opposition have got because they're just going through a fallow period for talent at the moment.
Yeah, but I guess it would be kind of a seamless transition if they went from one manager who wasn't giving many tactical instructions to another manager who doesn't give many tactical instructions. Like, while we're talking international football, I did want to get your take briefly on England. Like, at the start of the Nations League, there was, I guess it got a bit of a hard time, the Nations League. People thought that it was too convoluted a format. It wasn't going to bring the excitement that UEFA were imagining it might do. But it seems from an English perspective, that's not been the case at all. It's been happy times.
Yeah, I don't think it's just from an England perspective either. I mean, if you look at Scotland, like, that group went down to the wire. UEFA, I mean, we don't say this very often, but UEFA were right about this. International friendlies for years have been unbearable. And it's true that they're better for England now because there's a young team who look like they're getting better, look like they might go somewhere, and are also, amazingly, for those of us who've grown up with the England team, likeable too. And representative of England and all of these things. But the competition itself is balanced, so teams are playing teams of equivalent quality, and it means something. Specifically with England again, and this is to Slaven Bilic's remarkable credit, he somehow managed 10 years ago to foment a rivalry between England and Croatia that still exists now. And I mean, that is very strange, but that obviously added some spice. I don't know what he must have said to them, but I guess he played on the superiority complex of the English people when England played Croatia in 2008. And someone said in the press, I think it was Michael Owen, who is obviously renowned for his profound insights, that none of the Croatian players would get in the England team. And I mean, that's still winding them up now. And we heard it after the World Cup semi-final. But I don't think it's just in that league. It's that you're watching matches between teams that are roughly as good as each other. There's something to play for. And I don't think that who wins the European Nations Cup or whatever they've called it is going to be something that is remarkably exciting. But at the same time, it didn't have very much to beat, and it's certainly a huge improvement across the board. So, credit to UEFA for that, because, I mean, they couldn't have made it very much worse, but in the first instance, it sort of looked like they had, just by how complicated it all was. But actually, it's way, way better. And I think, hopefully, we'll see better games as a consequence of the tournaments, because the teams are going to be more used to playing competitive matches with each other and just playing longer with each other. There's not going to be 74 substitutions in the 63rd minute, and there'll probably be fewer cry-offs as well, because players want to play in these games because they know that they mean something, and they know that if they don't, they might lose their spot.
Yeah, for sure, Neil.
Is that the real winner of the UEFA Nations League? Journalists not having to keep track of every single substitution during an international friendly.
It's true also, journalists who, you know, might not have the imagination to ham up a meaningless friendly also don't have anything to write about at all. The rematch against Croatia from an English perspective was brilliant.
Having said all that though, if Ireland never have to play Wales or Denmark again for the next 10 years, I'll be perfectly happy.
Yeah, to be fair, our journalists have been well looked after, between WhatsApp voice messages, between will he, won't he, leaves the country, and the eventual departure.
All in all, though, 2 thumbs up on the UEFA Nations League.
2 thumbs up, without question. Premier League, though, is back. I guess, that's a good point there, Daniel. The idea of us kind of yearning during the international break for the return of the Premier League just doesn't actually exist as it previously did. Like, we're sitting here on a Friday before a pretty big weekend in the Premier League at both ends, and there isn't this sort of sense of anticipation that it's like, thank God the international break is over. So even just from an attitude point of view, it's worked to that extent.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it needed some reinvigoration, and I mean, it's never going to quite. International football's never going to be what it was. It's never going to quite get back to its primacy. But it's now not something you're just like, it's just, I can't wait for the Premier League to come back. I mean, it's also partly the thing that you get with club football is it's regular. So that most weeks there'll be something that you want to watch at the weekend, and there'll be something that you want to watch in midweek as well. And that hasn't always been. That's usually not the case with international football. It's still not entirely the case, where we've had some days where you look at the fixtures and think, no thanks, really. But it has created that level of excitement where the matches count for something in the same way that they do in a league. I mean, it's the difference between a competitive match and a friendly in the end.
Yeah, there has been club talk though this week in the papers in the midst of the Nations League, and it's been mostly transfer talk. Spurs and Manchester United at the crux of it. We'll get to Spurs in just a moment, but let's start with Manchester United and the talk around Marcus Rashford this week. There was some suggestion that Real Madrid are very, very interested in him as a potential replacement, a long-term replacement to Cristiano Ronaldo. I'm not sure about that, and then suddenly it came out yesterday that Manchester United may have a new contract for him. But then Paul Ince weighed in and he says he wondered if he sees young players like Jadon Sancho flying at Borussia Dortmund and playing every week and feels a little bit jealous. Is Marcus Rashford jealous of the situation that other young English players are in?
I don't know. I mean, because in the end, like, Jadon Sancho has played some games at Borussia Dortmund, but Marcus Rashford has started a Europa League final. He's been man of the match starting an FA Cup final. He's started 2 FA Cup finals, in fact. So when you compare what Marcus Rashford has had, and a lot of it off Jose Mourinho by hook or by crook, I mean, some of the games he might not have started if everyone had been fit, but Marcus Rashford has started games beyond the level that Jadon Sancho has. So I would be surprised if that were the case. And also, Jadon Sancho's at Dortmund, who are a good team, but not an elite level team in terms of what they've done, what they've done in the history of the game, the United have done. And also, they're not quite expected to do the same kind of thing. So I don't know if he would be jealous of Jadon Sancho. I mean, I would imagine he has been frustrated by not getting as much football as he would like, because he's a footballer who wants to play. But at the same time, he's living in Manchester, he's playing with his mates, or some of his mates anyhow, and he's near his family. So there is probably a level at which he is happy with that. But I think that it's getting to the point where he needs to play every week. And the problem for him has been partly with Jose Mourinho. He's not Jose Mourinho's idea exactly of what a centre-forward is. But at the same time, he also has elements of his game to improve. I don't think he's as good on the left wing as Anthony Martial, who has now nailed down that spot. So the only spot that he can really play in is centre-forward. And his hold-up play needs to improve and his finishing needs to improve. And if his hold-up play was better and his finishing was better, he'd be getting picked in that position every week. So he could go to another club and play every week, but I think if he went to an elite level club like Real Madrid or Juventus, he might find that he wasn't playing every week because he's not at the standard that they require either, because those clubs are better than United, and if he's not good enough for United, then he's not going to be good enough for them either. So I'm sure United will get to the end of this season with him, and probably another season with him. He's certainly not someone that I think should ever be allowed to leave United, but he has work to do, and I'm sure he's aware of that. He seems a grounded professional who understands that. So there's a bit of right and wrong on both sides. So like, the thing that always sticks in people's minds, I think, with Rashford is that he scored twice against Liverpool last season, played brilliantly, and then the next game was Sevilla at home in the Champions League. And he got moved out to the right to accommodate Sanchez, who was completely off his game. So that kind of thing is hard to justify. It was even harder to justify after it happened, because it was wrong, because it just didn't work. So that kind of thing needs to stop happening. But I think if he plays well in the end, he'll find that he keeps his spot. And even someone like Martial, it's taken him a while, but he's not really Mourinho's cup of tea, probably, as a player or as a bloke, but he's made himself undroppable, and hopefully Rashford will get the opportunity to do that, and he'll do it.
Just a quick word on Spurs-Chelsea before we let you go, Daniel. It's the big game of the weekend. It's tomorrow at 5:30. And whenever transfer rumours come up around Christian Eriksen, we're reminded of this idea that he's paid 75 grand a week, which is ludicrously low. Samir Nasri is going to get 80 grand a week if he goes to West Ham, just to put that into a little bit of perspective. And I think Jonathan Wilson put it very well in The Guardian this morning, saying that Spurs are always in this sense of just flirting with an existential crisis. They're always one win or one defeat away from them being defined by that very result. It's Chelsea tomorrow. It's a win, as I say, that would suddenly propel them into potential title challengers if they won it. Well, not really, but they would say that they're a top 3 team. But if they lose it, suddenly it becomes a battle, and a really big battle for the top 4.
I don't entirely agree with that. I think that Spurs are in a battle for the top 4, and they're not going to win the league, and it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. I think that the problem with Spurs is that there's a feeling, even though they've got more points than they've ever had at this stage of the season, there's a feeling that things have got as good as they're going to get for them until they can spend some money. They missed 2 opportunities to win the league when Leicester and Chelsea won it, and in fact they didn't even get close in those seasons, and I think they're going to end up regretting that, because they're now moving ground. It's obviously taking far longer than it was meant to, and costing far more than it was meant to, and the only way of improving at this point, because there's a good team that they have to catch if they want to win the league, is by spending money that they don't have. And what actually might happen in the end is, if Pochettino decides he's had enough, which looks like it might happen from what he's been saying, then there's a good chance that some of the players will decide that they've had enough as well. My guess would be that players like Dele Alli, like Eriksen, maybe even Harry Kane, are only there as long as Pochettino's there. And I think almost like the length of the contract that Harry Kane signed suggests that they're a get-out, because was it 6 or 7 years? No player would ever sign a contract of that length unless there were get-outs, because it's just like, who knows what could possibly happen. I can't believe that Harry Kane's advisor would say sign that and stay there for 6 or 7 years without any way of leaving with this club that's taken on this enormous expense. So that sort of tells you that there must be ways out of it for Harry Kane, and similarly for Pochettino. And that would be the concern for Spurs. At the moment, they're doing really well. And even if they lose at home to Chelsea, you can lose at home to Chelsea and still finish in the top 4. It wouldn't be an awful result. And so I wouldn't get too excitable either way, but for either team, about what happens in that game. And the truth is neither of them need the points exactly, because neither of them are going to win the league, and both of them are in the battle for the top 4, whatever happens. So Spurs are in a good position. Mauricio Pochettino has done an incredible job, and we've got to remember that they've got this number of points this season, and they haven't really started playing well yet. So they do have some gears to find. So they may or may not find them tomorrow, but at some point this season you would think they'll hit their stride, and then if they do, they will finish in the top 4, but they won't win the league, which we sort of knew before.
So the big game of the weekend means nothing at all. Daniel Harris, thanks a million for your time.
See you again.